This study, a corpus-based study on natural interpreting, what bilingual child data can tell us about the interpreting process, was presented in the first Coloquio Hermēneus. Our study consists of 3 parts. In the first part, we'll try to contextualize our work into disciplines, translation studies and corpus-based interpreting studies. In the second part, we'll deal with the key concept of our study, that is natural interpreting, what is natural interpreting and why it is relevant for our research. And finally, we'll focus on how our study develops. Translation studies corpora were incorporated in the 1990s, and they were devoted to different areas from not only theoretical but also descriptive or empirical perspective. They are meant to compile text according to different variables, such as the mode, the genre, the type of translator, or the type of languages involved in those texts. They are based on a methodology that is also based on electronic tools. And the focus is usually the study of the nature of translation, and their main aims are usually the investigation about the universals of translation, or the translation norms, or the style of translators, for example. As for corpus-based interpreting studies, they were corpora, they were more recently developed, and they focus on the patterns of oral discourse. They use data on the translation process using interviews, notes, or any other type of method, such as the TAP method. They focus on empirical work with adult interpreters that could be either professionals or students of translation or untrained bilinguals. And their empirical work is also focused on professional genres. For example, simultaneous or consecutive interpreting in courts, or interpretation in the European Parliament conferences. That's why in this corpus-based interpreting studies we can find very few studies, not easily available, and they don't usually provide very detailed transcriptions of the interpreting events. And we can say that only a small portion take natural interpreting as the focus of their research. In this case, or in this part, we'll deal with the key part of our study, that is natural translation. Natural translation was defined by Harris in 1977 as the one done by bilinguals in everyday circumstances and without a special training for it. This term was more recently referred to as natural interpreting due to the oral dimension of this type of translation. One example of natural interpreting case would be the one in one, where Simon translates house into casa so that his mother Melanie can understand what he said. And he was 2 years and 1 month old when he produced this natural interpreting case. The consequences of Harris' seminal work are the following. The first one is a widening of the scope of translation as an innate skill that develops parallel with bilingualism. A widening of a scope that also implies that translation is used as a communicative function, not only in social contexts, but also in familiar ones. A second consequence of Harris' work was that we have to take into account different variables, such as the translation cases we're going to study, that is, translations that naturally occur in oral or written discourses. And a different variable we could also take into account is the type of translators, that is, bilingual children or bilingual adults with no formation in translation or in interpretation. The third consequence would be to have a different concept of corpus methodology. That is, we would be interested in the compilation of natural interpreting cases performed by or produced by untrained bilinguals as interpreters in everyday situations and for a certain period of time. This concept of corpus methodology would include to work with longitudinal translational corpora to study linguistic phenomena that are inherent to the translation or interpreting process. That would mean that we could study the emergence and development of translation competence, and we could also study linguistic phenomena as evidence of regular tendencies in translation strategies used by bilingual children, and we could apply these results to translation programs of translation programs for students of translation. As for previous studies on natural interpreting based on corpora, we can find samples of isolated examples or notes from bilingual children's longitudinal data, but they don't provide a very detailed context of the interaction. And we can find two examples of those isolated examples or samples in 2A and 2B, where Louis, that is the child interpreter in Runa study, or Michael in Swain study, where they have to translate what his father in case of 2A or the Francophone investigator in 2B said, so that these interlocutors can understand what they said. We can also find studies about the translation behavior of young interpreters, but where the developmental factor is not included. We can find an example of this type of studies in Cosato 2008, okay, and with an example in 3, where Brigitta, in this case the child, when she was 4 years and 10 months old, has to act as an interpreter between a Swedish speaker and an English speaker so that they can understand each other. We can find other studies where they use longitudinal, where longitudinal data are used, but these data come from students' written translation, from students' written performance, so they focus on the study of the written translation competence rather than the oral translation competence. So we can say that there is a gap in the corpus-based interpreting studies because the situation is characterized by very few studies on natural interpreting linguistic analysis. Most of them are incomplete data because they lack situational context or they don't provide verbal information. So we need longitudinal studies on natural interpreting so that we can analyze the emergence of the translation competence in bilingual children. And we also need a delve into the origin of the translation competence so that we can study the translation activity and the translation process itself. Sorry. And we also need some tools for systematization and sharing of data. So our study aims at investigating the genuine translational mechanisms used by 2 bilingual children. We intend to analyze the patterns and development in interpreting from lexical parents to more complex strategies. And we also intend to show the importance of the role of the linguistic context, dealing not only with spontaneous but also experimental interactions. So our study stems from a longitudinal bilingual corpus that is called Ferfulice, that is available in Child's, an online data bank, and where the participants are 2 children, Simon and Leo, who were born in Salamanca, Spain, and they are simultaneous bilinguals, more specifically English-Spanish bilinguals. They live in a linguistic context where their parents follow the one parent, one language rule. That is, their mother speaks to them in her L1 English, and their father speaks to them in his L1, that is Spanish. The age range that covers this corpus is of almost is longer than 6 years, and the data recorded include not only not only spontaneous and experimental data, not only spontaneous but also experimental data, and the data recorded covers a period of 83 hours. For this study, we have made a selection from a fairly thick corpus, and we have compiled 227 natural interpreting occurrences. We have covered the age range that goes from 2 years to 6 years and 3 months in the age of the children, and the spontaneous data amounts up to 31 hours and plus 2 hours of the interpreting sessions, that is the experimental data. And we have also used a developmental classification of the data based on the MLU in words, that is the mean length utterance in words, as an objective method to measure the linguistic development and the linguistic competence of our children. We have also used the child's software tools, that is the chat transcription system and the CLAM programs, for example, MLU being one of them. A proposal of analysis of natural interpreting cases from our selection is found in Table 1. For this presentation, I will focus only on 3 of these variables. That is the activity, the grammar interpretation typology, and the type of a stimulus, that is, in this case, a contextual variable, the type of a stimulus the children receive when they translate. As for the first variable, that is the translation activity, we have distinguished 3 types of translations. Complete translation, as in example 1, where Simon translates house into Spanish casa. Incomplete translations, that is when code switching is included in the production. That is what happens in example 3, where Simon translates what Susana said, saying tienes que marcar el month, so not providing a complete target text in Spanish. And we have also taken into account those cases where there should be a null product, that is when there is an absence of a target text, like in example 4, where Leo doesn't know or doesn't want to translate, even though his mother asks him to do it. As for variable number 1, the grammar interpretation mapping, we have distinguished 4 types of natural interpreting cases. Lexical parents due to a communicative need, like in example 5a, where Leo translates what his brother said, and the lexical parents without a communicative need. In this case, in 5b, there is no need for anyone, like in 5a, where the Spanish investigator instead asked Leo to translate, so there was a communicative need, so that this investigator could understand what Simon said. While in lexical parents, not due to a communicative need, we can observe in 5b, for example, that Simon translates what Leo said, vaca, into cow, even though his mother, Melanie, understood what Leo said. The third type of translation that we have taken into account is the expansive natural interpreting. That is when the target text involves a more complex mapping than the source text, what means that the lexical syntactic properties of the source text are incorporated in a more detailed target text structure. So this is something that happens in 5C, where Simon translates no puedo into English help. While we can also find the other side of an expansive natural interpreting case, that is the economic natural interpreting cases. That is when the target text involves a simplified mapping, that is the lexico-syntactic properties of the source text are incorporated in a less detailed target text structure. And this is what happens in example 5D, where Leo translates all the long utterance produced by Susana, saying, lo haces en español. As for the third variable, the type of a stimulus the children receive when they translate, we have distinguished between those cases that, those translations that were requested by their parents, those requested by their researchers, and those produced on their own initiative. That is when there is an absence of a verbal stimulus, like can you say that in English? Don't you know how to say that in Spanish? Okay, like in previous examples. In this case, we have that they translate on their own initiative, like in example 5B, where Simon translated vaca into cow, even though nobody told him to do it. As for the analysis of the natural interpreting cases in our longitudinal data, and according to developmental classification, we have distinguished different stages in the linguistic development of our participants, of the children of our study, according to the MLU. We have also used different elicitation techniques, not only spontaneous data that are most of them concentrated on stages 1 and 2, while experimental data, the other type of data that we have included in our study, only appear in stage 3. In order to carry out our analysis, we have analyzed our linguistic variables, taking into account a contrast of proportion. So a statistical method that is useful to detect significance. As for the analysis of the translation activity, that is variable number 1, we can observe from the information rendered in table number 3 that the children produce significantly more complete natural interpreting cases in all stages. So we can state that interpreting is an efficient communicative strategy in these children. As for the analysis of variable number 2, rendered in table 4, we can say that in stages number 1 and 2, that is where most of the data are of the spontaneous kind, not most, sorry, so all of them are of the spontaneous type. The children produce more pairings, not due to a communicative need. While in stage number 3, that is in the experimental data, they produce economic and expansive translations. They produce more economic and expansive translations than in the previous stages, so they use more complex strategies in their translational behavior. So again, we can state that interpreting is an effective communicative strategy in the participants of our study, that they also show a development in the use of the natural interpreting strategies, and that it is very important to take into account the type of context in the interpretative mapping analysis. As for variable number 3, the type of a stimulus the children receive when they translate, in stage number 1, they produced more requested natural interpreting cases, and this has to do with the type of data we are dealing with. In this case, spontaneous data, where the parents try to follow very strictly the rule 1 parent 1 language rule, so they are asking them to translate either in English or in Spanish, so that they keep this rule. In stage number 2, there are no significant differences due to a low number of tokens, while in stage number 3, we obtain the same result, that is, they produce more requested natural interpreting cases, But in this case, we are dealing with experimental data where the role of context, again, is important because the children in this data respond to the test requirements perfectly, since they are asked to translate for the investigators, and that's what they do, at least most of the times. So for our general conclusions, we can say that our study have shown that our participants, that these bilingual children, can separate their languages from very early on, but they can also combine the languages in natural interpreting with no problem. We can also state that natural interpreting cases establish a contextually based source text, target text relationship. So we have observed that the natural interpreting type is linked to linguistic and contextual factors. And we have also observed that there has been a parallel development of their bilingual competence and their translation competence, where the role of context is very important. Since in the initial cases, in the initial stages, they produce lexical pairings most of the times to adjust to the linguistic context, while in more advanced stages, they produce other type of translation or natural interpreting cases, that is economic and expensive translations that show a deeper understanding of linguistic properties and that respond to specific contextual needs. So our study perspective points to the interaction of two disciplines, that is bilingual acquisition data and interpreting studies. So we can offer a new perspective in the interpreting process analysis. Our study also points to the need the need for natural interpreting research based on corpora, so that we can have a more global perspective on interpreting and translation with other objects of investigation. We also need research groups and tools as a common language to all corpora, and this is something that Childs provides, since we can have a transcription system, a common transcription system, that is CHAT, that allows us to pair transcripts with audio files or video files. We can also have an e-format for different programs to carry out linguistic analysis, such as the programs we can find in CLAN. We can analyze data from different language pairs, and this data bank is for free, and it has a very user-friendly access. So the possible venues of our work could be to study or to find similarities and differences between the results obtained from simultaneous data in contrast with sequential bilinguals data. We could also analyze other language brokering context where bilinguals play the role of interpreters, and we could also take into account different language pairs, not only English or Spanish, as in our case, but other language pairs. Thanks for your attention.